So this week, I had the chance to go fishing. I do it often. It's really been like my routine over the summer. It's been my routine in the fall because the rockfish are starting to run back down the bay, and I look for dinner in the bay. It's a lot of fun for me. I really enjoy it. My uncle and I go out every now and then. But on Wednesday afternoon, I had my day off was Wednesday this week, and so Wednesday afternoon, I find myself in the bay. But before that, you need to know what I did on Tuesday. So Tuesday, I needed to upgrade some fishing rods because all of my fishing rods are around bass fishing. And if you don't fish, that's fine. You can still follow along in this story. Either way, when you're catching fish that are this size, you need a smaller rod than if you're catching fish that are this size, right? So I went out and invested in two different rods. Actually, my uncle bought one and I bought the other. They were the same exact rod and they were made for the bay. They're made for trolling. They're made for big fish, like 45-pound test line. Like there is not a fish we're going to catch in that water that we shouldn't be able to get in because the rod malfunctions. And so I'm excited about it. So Wednesday afternoon, we head out. We're in the water. We're enjoying ourselves. And we're bait fishing. So we're catching some like really small fish that we can use as bait. So he catches some croaker. And I was like, great, let's get this hooked up. Let's get it out on one of the new rods and let's see how this thing does. And so you set up the new rod. I put it out. It's leaning out over the back seat of the boat. And everything's going fine. And if you've ever been bay fishing or if maybe you've been deep sea fishing, there's this real distinct sound, even if you've just watched like not Deadliest Catch. There's the show Wicked Tuna I watch every now and then. Like you hear this sound. It's the sound of the line being pulled out, and it's called the drag. And it's like this, you hear like these little clicks, and then you hear like this zzz, because the line is just running out, because a much bigger fish has hit it, and it's swimming away, and then you know to pick up the rod and begin to fight the fish, and hopefully bring it in, cook it, have dinner, all that kind of stuff, right? So, I'm fishing. I'm continuing to bottom fish while this rod's out because the click is loud. I know if the drag starts pulling, I'll be able to hear it. So I'm over on this side of the boat, and our boat's not that big. I'm over on this side of the boat. I'm fishing, and I hear behind me this click of the drag start to go out, and I hear zzz, zzz, and I turn to look as I'm holding one rod. I turn to look at this other rod, and my rod is not just sitting there, but it's like bouncing, like it's about to go out of the back of the boat. And so immediately I like drop this rod and go to dive to reach the other one. And as I do, the rod bounces. My hand doesn't hit over top of the rod. It hits underneath the rod, like knocking it up in the air. And I watch this rod become a spear headed straight down into the water. And immediately in that moment, I'm left with a decision. Do I leave the safety of the boat and the comfortability of the boat? And do I jump into this water knowing that the water is probably going to slow that rod down a little bit? Do I take the risk, jump in the water, and hope I can catch it? Or do I sit in the comfort of the boat, warm and dry, but not only lose my investment, lose the reason I invested in the fishing rod in the first place, which is my fish that's on the other end of that rod? And I wonder this morning. This is kind of where I want to take off for this morning. Have you ever found yourself there? Not like sitting on the back of a boat, watching a $100 fishing rod go into the water and wondering if you should jump in behind it. I mean, have you ever found yourself in a situation between two decisions where neither of them seems that desirable, both of them are going to have consequences, both of them aren't things that you necessarily like, and the whole entire time the clock is just ticking and working against you? Because for every split second that went by, that rod was further and further away, and it was less of a decision I was going to make and more of one that was going to be made for me and one that I wasn't going to be happy with. Have you ever been there? Maybe it's not about a fishing rod. Maybe it's the job you work in. And you got that new job, or maybe you switched positions a year ago or 6 months ago, and you thought, this is going to be great. It's going to provide for my family, and it's going to do all the things that I'm looking for, and I'm actually going to enjoy getting up in the morning and going to work. But it seems like the past couple weeks, the job is just crushing your soul. You hate getting up in the morning. You hate going back to that place. And it's providing for your family, but it feels like it's robbing you of your joy. And you go, I'd rather be flipping burgers at McDonald's than working this job. But the problem is if I go flip burgers at McDonald's, I can't provide for my family. And so you find yourself stuck between a soul-crushing job that at least pays the bills or something else that who knows how it's going to leave you feeling, but at least you'll enjoy getting up in the morning. Maybe it's not job related. Maybe it's that relationship. Maybe it's that guy you find yourself waking up next to every now and then. And you know he's not going to be the one that takes you into your future. And you know as you head towards your future, he's not even the one you want to take. But you also understand that the dating game sucks and being lonely is even worse. And you're real tired of that game. And you're real tired of trying to figure it all out. And so you're stuck between, do I just compromise my morals? Do I compromise on these things and deal with somebody I don't really like? Or do I put myself back in the loneliness camp with chocolate and ice cream, hoping to get through another Valentine's Day? Maybe your decision isn't relational or financial. Maybe your decision is just that. Maybe it's, I need to cut out some ice cream and chocolate. And I need to get up and go to the gym a little bit more because I know the way I've been treating my body doesn't leave my body feeling very healthy. And God calls me to be a steward of what he's given me. And the first thing he gave me was my body. And so I need to take care of it a bit better. But the idea of getting up at 5 a.m. and going and getting in the pool, especially when it's cold, it's just stupid. And it's going to leave me feeling sore. And God, you don't want me feeling sore, so I'm just going to stay in bed. But maybe the decision we find ourselves in is, do I do the hard work of working out and eating a bit healthier? And I don't mean just for a day. I mean like over time. And see, we all understand that like one day of eating healthier and one day of working out is not going to change our lives. But the decision to do something that's a routine is difficult. And so we're stuck between, do I change my routine so that I can experience a healthier body, or do I just grab another pint of ice cream and let Ben and Jerry's talk to me about it? That's what I choose to do a lot. Tonight's show with Jimmy Fallon's ice cream, excellent from Ben and Jerry's. Not that I'm suggesting it or that it's healthy, but if you go down that road, I just give you ice cream to try out. That's not what you guys should be taking notes on, by the way. I saw some people writing down, tonight's show with Jimmy Fallon. In any case, have you ever found yourself there? Stuck between a rock and a hard place. See, because it's what we're going to look at with David this morning. And I think what you're going to see with David is that David, over time, finds himself multiple times in life, just like we do, stuck between two decisions, neither of which seem that desirable, both of which have consequences, and both of which he has no idea what hangs in the balance at the end of his decision. And so we looked last week at the life of David. We began to look at him as a shepherd boy. He's like 13 or 14-year-old out in the field. He's the youngest in his family. And the prophet comes and wants to anoint one of Jesse's sons as a new king. And Jesse doesn't even nominate David to be in the room. Like he's completely overlooked. Jesse lines up all of his other sons first. And Samuel, the prophet, says, no, none of these are the one that I'm supposed to be anointing. God's given me no clarity but an answer of no over these people. Do you have any more kids? And he goes, well, I have one son, but he's out in the field like watching some sheep. He can't be the one that you're talking about. Like, dude plays music all the time. He doesn't look like a king. He doesn't act necessarily like a king. I mean, he watches our sheep. He goes, bring him. We're not even going to sit down until he gets here. And he comes in, and God speaks to Samuel, and Samuel says, this is the one. And he anoints David as king, and then David's like, great. But David doesn't become king that day. Jesse sends him right back out in the field to watch some more sheep. And his brothers go off to war because they've been trained to fight, and they're prepared to fight battles, and they're fighting against this army called the Philistine army, or the Philistines, and they're off at battle, and Jesse calls for David, and he says, hey, David, I need you to head up to the front lines. And David's like, yes, let's go. And he goes, no, you're just taking them some food. You're just running an errand. And so David goes and he takes his brothers some food, and he asks what's going on the front line. And they say, look, there's this really tall dude on the other side who's like a battle-tested warrior who keeps challenging us. And David goes, I'll fight him. And if you were here last week, and if you weren't, you can check out the podcast, but he goes and fights Goliath, and he kills him, and he cuts off his head. And then we talked about it last week, but then he like walks around with the man's head for like a couple days. I don't know why. I think it's a weird version of a rabbit's foot, which, by the way, pay attention to the rest of this message, because the rabbit's foot just gets weirder. But the story continues in 1 Samuel 18, and what we find out is this, that Saul's son, now Saul's the first king of Israel, and Saul is David's leader, and Saul's son Jonathan loves David, loves spending time with him. They become best friends. They enjoy hanging out. Saul begins to have some stress and some different issues and some things going on in life. And Saul would call David in, and David would play his harp, and Saul would feel some peace that he couldn't experience any place else. And we find this verse in 1 Samuel 18:5. It says, whenever Saul asked David to do, David did it successfully. So Saul made him a commander over the men of war. Now remember, he's probably 16 or 17 years old. An appointment that was welcomed by the people and by Saul's officers alike. Like, David is extremely well respected, and quickly we find out that David's a little too well respected for Saul's liking. Because the women in the city begin to come up with this chant, Saul has slain his thousands and David has slain his 10,000s. And Saul's like, soon they're going to make him king. And he has a problem with it. And so things begin to take a turn for David, where he finds himself at one point playing the harp for the king and just serving his leader. And then all of a sudden, he hears a sound that's very distinct. It's not the sound of a fishing line being pulled out against a drag. It's the sound of a spear coming out of its sheath and hurling at David's head. It says that David dodges it, and Saul regains the spear and throws it at him again. And it says about the second time, he intended to pin him to the wall. You think your boss is bad. David escapes that moment. And Jonathan goes to bat for David. He begins to talk to his father. He said, you didn't have a problem with this man when he was off killing Goliath when you wouldn't. Why do you have a problem with him now? And Saul says, you know what? You're right. As long as I live, David will not be killed. Well, Saul's jealousy continues to move forward. David continues to work for him, but Saul's jealousy continues to turn into rage at different times. And at one point, Saul comes up with this great idea. He says, listen, I can't kill David. Like, I get that. I made a commitment. I can't kill him. But what I can do is marry off one of my daughters to him. And there's always a price that the man has to pay to get the wife. And I'll put him out at war against the Philistines. And I'm going to let the Philistines kill him since I've been unsuccessful in killing him. And so they come to David and they say, hey, David, we want you to take my daughter and take her hand in marriage. I want you to be the king's son-in-law. And David says this, who am I but a lowly shepherd from humble beginnings that I would be worthy of marrying the king's daughter? And he says no. And so Saul gives his daughter off to somebody else. Well, then one of that daughter's younger sisters named Michal has love for David. It says that she falls in love with David. She desperately wants to be with David. And Saul's like, great, here's another opportunity. Now, he doesn't tell his daughter that, but he goes into this idea of here's another opportunity that I can do this. And so he sends his men to talk to David, and their job is to convince David that he's worthy of the position and that he can fulfill this task and that he can marry the king's daughter. And so they go to him, and David is a little bit more receptive the second time. And he says, what does the king want from me that I be worthy of his daughter? And what Saul comes back with is probably the weirdest thing in all of Scripture to me. I mean, I'm being serious. It's weird. It's awkward. I don't get it. So I'm going to put it on the screen so you guys can read it. I'll read it out loud, but it's just strange. I feel like if I just read it this morning, you guys would be like, you're making it up. Here's what Saul's men reported back to the king. When Saul's men reported back to the king, he told them, tell David, all I want for the bride price is 100 Philistine foreskins. Vengeance on my enemies is all I really want. But what Saul had in mind was that David would be killed in the fight. David was delighted to accept the offer. What is wrong with their society? And before the time limit expired, he and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines. Above and beyond on the weird collection of male anatomy. David fulfilled the king's requirements by presenting all their foreskins to him. Last week, he walked around with a dude's head. This week, it's just weirder. So Saul gave his daughter Michal to David to be his wife. Saul gives up his daughter. So now you got to see this from the perspective of David. Saul is now his king. Saul is also his boss. Saul is also his father-in-law. And Saul is also his best friend's dad. And things continue, and Saul's jealousy continues to grow, and his rage continues to be out of control. And there's another situation in 1 Samuel 19 where Saul grabs another spear while David's playing the harp and throws it at him again, intending to pin him to the wall. And David goes, something has to change. He goes home and tells his wife about it, and his wife hears that men are going to be coming for him and hunting him down. And this is where we find David stuck between two decisions. And you go, it seems pretty simple. You just got to leave the palace. But if you leave the palace, you're leaving behind the comforts of the palace. You're leaving behind your wife. You're leaving behind your family. You're leaving behind your friends. See, David knows what it is to spend time in a field and to live in a cave. And he goes, the palace has some luxuries that the caves don't have. And so to walk away from this, not only do I have to give up on my job, not only do I need to walk away from my family, not only do I need to leave my best friend, but I'm also going to find myself giving up some of the luxuries that I've been enjoying by being this close to the king. But if I stay, my life is at risk. Oh, and by the way, if he leaves, his life is at risk. Because Saul can treat it as treason and abandonment and can hunt him down. And David probably understands that most likely Saul's coming after him if he leaves. So he can leave and leave everybody behind, which obviously he doesn't want to do. Or he can stay, enjoy the luxuries of the palace, enjoy the family and the friends, but just has to dodge some spears every now and then. It's in that moment where I think we understand David a little bit more and understand that maybe some people in Scripture understand us. How does he choose what to do? Well, to come to that answer and to give you an answer for this morning, I want to fast forward a couple thousand years to another guy. This guy started out with the name Saul, not the same Saul. He started out with the name Saul. He was a persecutor of Christians. He hated believers. Listen, if you've ever struggled to believe in the resurrection or in some of the miracles that the Bible talks about Jesus did, this dude did too, and he lived in the time of Jesus. He was a Pharisee. He was a leader of the Jewish people, and when he heard about Jesus and he saw people following, he said they're blaspheming the one true God, and they need to be punished. And so Saul set out on missions. Literally, we find multiple missions where he set out to kill Christians, to have them arrested, to have them persecuted. Saul would go to leaders and beat on the doors of the courts and of the judges, and he would say, listen, I need you to give me authorization to go arrest some more followers of the way, which was the beginning of Christianity. That's what it was called. And Saul's on a mission. He's already stoned one of the followers of Christ, Stephen, and he's on a mission now to a city called Damascus because he's heard there's a lot of believers there, and he says, I want to take them out. They need to be punished. Let us drag them out of their houses and arrest them and take them back to Rome in chains. And the leaders say, great, go for it. But Jesus interacts with him on his way to Damascus and says, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he goes, who are you, Lord? He says, I'm Jesus. And in a moment of interaction with Jesus, Saul changes. He goes from persecuting Christians to building the church. He finds himself in different parts of Asia, different parts of Turkey, building the church, traveling all over the place, starting churches to promote this movement because Jesus is actually who he says he is. And Paul is so zealous about spreading the gospel that he eventually finds himself arrested by the friends he used to have, and he's imprisoned for having shared and promoted the gospel so much. And from there, he begins to write some letters to the churches that he had started. And he writes a letter to the church at Galatia. We call it the book of Galatians. He writes a letter to the church at Philippi. We call it the book of Philippians. He writes a letter to the church at Ephesus. We call it the book of Ephesians. We're going to look at that in just a minute, but here's what you need to understand. It wasn't just a letter to the church at Ephesus. It was a letter that just started with the church of Ephesus. It'd be like me mailing you something and saying share it with your whole family. But yours is the address that I put on it. So it's like Paul addressed it to the church at Ephesus, but he understood and they understood that this was something that was to be shared with all the churches in their area. And I believe it's something that we can share with our church this morning. And he's wrapping up this book to the church at Ephesus, to the churches in that area. And here's what he says: be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but live like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. In other words, the world is not going to model for you how to get it right. And then he says, don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. See, I feel like the Apostle Paul, because Saul's name changes to Paul, I feel like the Apostle Paul, if he could be here this morning, and he goes, when you find yourself stuck between two decisions, and neither one seems that desirable, and both seem to have some consequences, but you know you need to get it right, here's the question I want you to ask: what's the wise thing to do? See, this question is so much better than what's the right thing to do. And it far exceeds what's the legal thing to do. Because you can legally go get more credit cards, put yourself in more debt, and file bankruptcy to get out of it. That's just not wise, although it may be legal. You can legally keep sleeping with that guy and wrecking your life and leaving yourself feeling shame. But it's not a wise thing to do. You can legally just go quit your job, take unemployment, and say, screw it, I'm just going to live off the government for a while. That doesn't mean it's a wise thing to do. See, I think this question is more polarizing and gives unparalleled clarity when it comes to making tough decisions. I don't think it answers everything, but I think it answers just about everything. But we can't just stop there, because what's wise for me and what's wise for you and what's wise for the person next to you can all be different. And so we've got to ask some questions that give us a little bit more clarity. And it starts with this: based on my past experiences, what's the wise thing to do? See, you might be able to go out with them and you might be able to have a couple drinks, but last time I went out with them and last time I had a couple drinks, I was left with a lot of regret. And so what might be all right for you to go do is not a wise decision for me to make, because last time I was around those people, I made a lot of compromising decisions and I have a lot of shame over those things. And let me just push on this real quick based on your past experiences. If you go, what's the wise thing to do? Isn't that great of a question? What if you would have asked it before some of those experiences? What about your biggest regret and the shame you try and hide and the things you just want to bury and the parts of your soul you don't ever want exposed? What if in those moments you would have asked this question and applied it? What's the wise thing to do? Would it have not stopped us from some of those decisions? I think it would have stopped us from every one of those decisions. Because the things that leave us with regret and shame are not the decisions we made wisely. It's the moments when we acted thoughtlessly and disregarded what God said and just said, I got to satisfy something now. So based on your past experiences, what's the wise thing for you to do? But it doesn't stop there. You got to ask another question. Based on my current circumstances, what's the wise thing for me to do? See, because I just had a baby. I'm trying to get out of debt with my wife. I'm trying to make some better decisions. So that big vacation, that trip to Israel that we'd love to do that costs $5,000 is great, but it's not a wise decision for us right now. We got a lot of other things on the plate we need to take care of first. And your friends might be going off and they might be going on that big spring break trip or that big excursion, or they're going on that thing, or they're going to that party, and you go, that's good for you. But based on my current circumstances, that just doesn't make sense for me. See, one of the things that a pastor said one time was we have to learn to say no for now and understand that it doesn't mean no forever. No for now is not the same as no forever. And he gave an example. His son was 2 years old. He was down in his guitar studio in his basement, and he could hear upstairs his son crying. And he had the option of, I can shut the door and I can be in a soundproof room and I can just jam out on my guitar, or I can go be engaged with my wife and my child. And ultimately the decision he made was to sell the guitar and to change that room into something else. And he said, I had to make the decision that it was no for now on the guitar studio, just not no forever. And he talks about it in hindsight, and he says, now that my kids are grown and they're out of the house, I got the guitar studio back. I love playing and I enjoy it. But I had to learn to say no because my current circumstances told me that it was not wise for me to go down that road. And so you got your past experiences that speak into what's wise. You've got your current circumstances that speak into what's wise. But then you've got to ask this, based on my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing for me to do? The saddest thing I think I ever see in ministry, and the saddest moments in my life, are the moments where I've sacrificed my future hopes and dreams on the altar of my current impatience. And maybe you don't want to look in the mirror and see it in your own life this morning, but I know you're thinking of a good friend that you go, I see him do it on a regular basis. What do you want in your future? What story do you want to be able to tell? What are you doing now to help set that up? Because let me help you. For everybody in the room who's going, my future's my future, and I'll take care of it later. Nobody this morning woke up and said, I hope I become a heroin addict. It's a series of decisions that lead to an addiction that they never wanted. We've engaged couples multiple places in this room, and we got a lot of people in our church who are getting engaged because I'm doing a lot of weddings coming up in the next 6 months. I'm excited about that to help people take their next step, but here's the thing. All of those weddings are first weddings. I don't think any of them are planning their second wedding right now. None of them are going, man, when this relationship falls apart, I'll do it different on that second wedding day. And I hope I get it right then. No, they're hoping they get it right now. Because their future hope and dream is to spend the rest of their life with this person, living with intimacy and authenticity and a deep relationship with God, with the person that they're connected with. See, we don't ever plan to fail. But how many times do we sacrifice our future on the altar of our impatience? We've got to learn to ask the question, what's the wise thing to do? So I'm going to put it all together. Based on my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing for me to do? Let's try and all say this together. I want you guys just to ask the question. Listen, I'll go ahead and give you the preview. The homework for this week is just to ask the question. You don't even necessarily have to apply it. I just think you owe it to yourself to at least know what the wise thing to do is. So let's try saying this together. Based on my past experiences, this is weak. We got to wake up. All right? We are almost done. I'm about to wrap this up. We're going to get out of here early. Thank Jesus for miracles. All right? Let's try this. Based on my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing for me to do? That's a question we've got to learn to ask. And I'm convinced it's the question that answers just about everything. So as the band comes back up, if you want to know what happened with the fishing rod, it's gone. I wasn't getting in that water. It wasn't happening. It wasn't going to be my solution. Actually, I was really frustrated. I heavily considered. My uncle sitting in the front of the boat said, I thought you were about to go over. And I said, I considered it, but the clock worked against me quick enough that I just knew it was inevitable that it was gone. So we've already figured out a solution. I'll get another rod this week when I have the time to go get it. If you want to know what happens in the life of David and the decision he has to make, you have two choices. You can read 1 Samuel 19 and 20 and pick up the scripture for yourself this week and discover what happens, or you can come back next week. Because this is where we're going to pick up the story. And here's what I want you to understand. Just like you don't know what happens in David's situation, we have no idea what's going to happen in ours. And that's so frustrating for me. I wish I could know what every outcome was going to be, but the promise we have from God is that He can make all things good, not that we know all the results. And so if you find yourself this morning stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to decide on where God's leading you, I'd encourage you to ask the question. I'd encourage you to follow through with whatever you discover, because you have no idea what hangs in the balance of that decision. Let's pray. God, I thank you for who you are. God, I pray that you would help us to be people bold enough to ask a question about what's the wise thing for us to do. God, it's challenging and it's revealing and it gives us clarity that maybe some of us don't want, but I pray that you just give us that clarity this week in our situation. And God, if we're overachievers, help us to follow through with it, but at least help us to ask the question, because I'm convinced we owe it to us to know if we were wise, here's what we'd do. If we wanted to do God's will, here's what it would be. God, thank you for loving us and giving us direction. It's in your name I pray. Amen.